subscribe and, you know, like the video. Dems are mad as hell. Mad at their base for demanding that they do things. How dare you demand that I do things? I don't want to do things. That's crazy. The expectation from me is that I do things. No thanks. Give me money now. All right. Yeah, stop linking the same Adam Johnson tweet. I know, dude. I started off the conversation by looking at this. Okay, please. I know, chatters. I know. This is how we started the convo, okay? God damn. Yeah, nobody wants to work anymore. The Democrats are quiet quitting. You know who's not quiet quitting, though? Freaking Donald Trump, dude. I told you Democrats resent their voters and want to punish them for not voting hard enough for them. I mean, this is a entirely new low for the Dems. One that is difficult to top, really. It's kind of wild. Like the expectation here is that the Dems do the bare minimum responsibility as like the opposition party and represent their constituents. You know, what the fuck do you want the Dems to do? First of all, this should never be like, you should never actually come in here with this kind of energy, okay? Let me explain. One, I talk about what the Democrats should do all the time. I actually showed you the Legion Miller video as well. That was really good in terms of like what they can do. They should be obstructing. They should behave. They should play ball in the same way that the Republicans do when they're the minority party, okay? They have already designed they've already designed a like fairly coherent strategy. Obstruct. Democrats are out here talking about how they'll do bipartisan compromise. Please just give us anything to work with. That is the wrong message. They should be consistently talking about how damaging it is that the Republicans are going with full tilt austerity. I'll take it one step further. The Republicans are not even just going with full tilt austerity. The Republicans, interestingly enough, right now have they have Congress to do things with, right? They have congressional power. And yet, for some weird reason, or not a weird reason, actually, for a very nefarious reason, the Trump executive office is actually deliberately sidestepping congressional approval and doing everything with executive mandate. And I think the reason why they're doing that is because they want to stress test the entire system and see how far they can get away with. Okay? This actually opens up a unique opportunity for constantly taking these battles to the court system and constantly making a big stink and trying to engage in some sort of popular mobilization. Okay? They're not even doing that, however. They're not doing that at all. And that's completely unacceptable. They should be obstructing the process every step of the way. They should be investigating whatever they can. Okay? And they should be making a big fuss every step of the way. Consistently going on television, consistently going and directly speaking out about all of the awful austerity measures that are being implemented. I'll give you one example, right? Elon Musk, in the process, according to The Lever, which is a great publication, by the way, Elon Musk, in the process of like undermining the Department of Education and trying to literally cut funding to public education in this country, has gotten additional billion-dollar contracts for his companies as a defense contractor. How the fuck does that work? You got the richest dude on the planet completely using the government as a cum sock, okay? Using it like as a flesh puppet, undermining teachers at a time when like education is dire to begin with, and talking about firing tens of thousands of federal employees while simultaneously putting more money into his own coffers. That's crazy. You shouldn't have to hear that from The Lever. You should be hearing that from every single Democrat. It is crazy. Like, I'm shocked that Ro Khanna came out with this statement. Like, and it gives you, and Ro Khanna is supposed to be one of the better fighters against the Trump agenda, right? Bill Clinton reduced the federal workforce by 351,000 by working with Congress to have voluntary buyouts under a Workforce Restructuring Act. The workforce grew by 2% in Trump's first term. The model for real lasting efficiency is work with Congress. How is that a good thing? I want 10 million more Americans working for the federal government, okay? I don't understand. People look at this and go, that's bureaucracy. That's inefficient. It's like, no, dude, It's a jobs program. That's what the government is supposed to do. Of course, I want more federal employees. I want a bigger government, okay? And a Democratic Party should be communicating why that's a good thing. Give me 200 million American federal government employees, okay? Especially when a lot of the austerity and a lot of the cuts that they're signaling with these executive orders and with DOGE in particular, they don't even make a dent in the overall budget, in our overall spending, because a lot of the spending goes to obviously the military, and a big chunks of the spending actually go to very helpful programs that are very popular. Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, they haven't gotten to that part yet, okay? When that part comes, when that battle comes, if the Democrats have nothing to say about that, I don't know what I will do, okay? I don't know what the American public will do. But having said that, these cuts that they're talking about, these cuts that they want to engage in, like I'll use the example of the NIH, okay? The NIH cuts in terms of cutting overhead spending from the National Institute of Health will undermine medical research in this country. This is a devastating thing to do, okay? But the overhead cuts that come with the National Institute of Health grants that are being cut will end up downsizing colleges, okay? What that means is they'll end up having to fire, in red states, public institutions of higher learning in red states will see layoffs. That means you are going to be firing Republicans as well. People do not have the foresight to comprehend how this entire system ties together, okay? It is ridiculous when you talk about layoffs at the federal level, when you talk about restructuring the federal government, you're talking about tens of thousands of people losing their jobs, okay? When you talk about cutting the NIH funding, you're talking about, again, tens of thousands of people losing their jobs. Republicans, independents, Democrats alike, Americans that are getting laid off. And for what purpose? Is there a good reason for any of this? No, of course not. But it's ridiculous that Ro Khanna is talking about cutting the federal workforce as a positive. Like talking about Bill Clinton cutting the federal workforce as a good thing. That wasn't a good thing at all. That was a bad thing. What's next? Is he going to talk about how Bill Clinton restructured welfare as a positive? That's ridiculous. Yeah. Alabama is a great example of this. Alabama's second largest employer is the University of Alabama. And Alabama reps, Republicans, as a matter of fact, already complaining about NIH funding cuts because it's going to affect the state's second largest employer. That's it. These guys are so horny for austerity. Remember yesterday when we were talking about the IMF and the World Bank and how they do economic imperialism on the global south? We're doing it to ourselves right now. And they're doing it in a way where they're not even thinking about the genuine damage that they're causing to the lives of millions of Americans. Ridiculous. And if you are not a part of this, like if you don't know anyone that's like a federal employee, if you don't know anyone that like works at a college, whether it's a, woke college professor or not, or even someone in the janitorial staff at a university, if you have no way of comprehending how this will be damaging, okay, you just think, oh, it's great that the government is cutting. It's so costly. It's so costly. They could be spending it on good things. Okay, what are they going to be spending it on? What are the good things that they're going to be spending all of this additional freed up resources on? Here, I'll give you a great example of how these cuts are idiotic at the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. The CFPB is tasked with a very good purpose, okay? The CFPB has a $1 billion budget. They haven't even used the entirety of their budget. They've only used like a quarter of $1 billion so far. I think they still have $700 million in the tank. Okay. And with a quarter of that budget, with a quarter of that $1 billion budget, okay, they were able to bring back to the American consumers $21 billion of fraudulent funds that were extracted from the American consumers. Okay. Credit card debt, predatory lenders, things of that nature. Okay. Medical debt. That's what they did. That's what the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau did, okay? Which, again, yeah, isn't even funded by taxpayer dollars. It's funded by fees collect. No, you're talking about a different thing. No, Consumer Financial Protection Bureau is not what you're thinking of. You're thinking of another thing. You're thinking of what's the banking institution? The one that what do you call it? The one that FDIC is what you're talking about when you say it's funded by the banks. The FDIC is funded by the banks, which is ironic because, again, the FDIC also plays a very important role. They are funded by bank fees. The FDIC, if you remember, played a pretty formative role when Silicon Valley was falling apart. And there was a lot of fear. There was a bank run taking place, if you remember. I saw a post by that dipshit Jason, whatever his, what's his face, recently, where he was like talking about how we need to gut the federal government by 10% and let people die. And then I saw someone quote retweeting him about how he was immediately begging the FDIC to save the Silicon Valley banks. No, not Jason, whatever his name is. I don't know what his Calacanis. This dumbass. Oh, here. Well, that's not what I was looking for, but until we balance the budget, I'm literally randomly cutting everything by 10 to 35% and seeing what happens. Okay? That's what he said. At least on this scenario, we live to fight another day. By the way, this is what happens when individuals who go broke, credit cards turn off, and Netflix get paused. Okay? So he's talking about this as a Silicon Valley loser, celebrating like the CFPB getting taken out and stuff like that. Meanwhile, when the bank run was taking place in Silicon Valley a couple years ago, he was begging the FDIC to instantly take action. Okay? You should be absolutely terrified right now. That is a proper reaction to a bank run and contagion. POTUS, Secretary Yellen must get on TV tomorrow and guarantee all deposits up to $10 million, or this will spiral into chaos. Second and third order effects reporting for duty. They got to bail SVB out if a white knight/queen doesn't show up this weekend. Yeah, you remember Big Daddy federal government when you're facing down the barrel of a bank run, okay? That's when you remember Big Daddy federal government. It is ridiculous. These guys are such douchebags and so immoral, so incompetent, so stupid. No morality, no consistency in their arguments whatsoever. Okay? Just understand this. I hope everyone here is at least like to a certain degree aware of the things that I'm talking about, okay? I can dive a little bit further into this to explain to you, like, it's a little complicated. I understand. Do you know what the FDIC is, for example, chatters? The FDIC is the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, okay? It is a big fund that the federal government has put together, here you go, so that they have deposit insurance for depositors in American commercial banks and saving banks. So in times of financial crisis, when there's not a lot of confidence in the banks, in order for, if a bank is going bankrupt, for example, if they don't have any money, all right, the FDIC basically comes in overnight and takes control over the bank and ensures and guarantees that your deposits are still real. Okay? The FDIC was created by the Banking Act of 1933, enacted during the Great Depression to restore trust in the American banking system. Because without that confidence, without that trust, why the would you ever give your money to a bank? More than 1/3 of banks failed in the years before the FDIC's creation. Okay? And bank runs were common. The insurance limit was usually $2,500 per ownership category, and this has been increased several times over the years, and it's now at $250,000 per ownership category. So the federal government ensures that no matter what kind of financial crisis is taking place, that up to $250,000 of your wealth is protected. Okay? Now, this is one of the many different ways in which the American government, the federal government, is protecting consumers in an invisible way that you don't even think about. Okay? This is good governance. This is good government. This is good legislation initially when it was created. There's a good reason for this to exist, okay? And that's per bank. Yes, exactly. So that is important for you to understand. Now, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau is a different federal agency, I believe created in, 2011? The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau is a different federal government agency that is tasked with combating fraudulent companies, okay? It works to extract resources It works to extract. It goes after basically fraudulent companies, credit card providers, healthcare, health insurance providers, like all matter of different companies. It was an independent agency in the United States government responsible for consumer protection in the financial sector. After 2007, the agency was originally proposed by Elizabeth Warren while she was a law professor. The CFPB's creation was authorized by the Dodd-Frank Wall Street Reform and Consumer Protection Act, whose passage in 2010 was a legislative response to the financial crisis of 2007 and 2008, and the subsequent Great Recession, and is the independent bureau within the Federal Reserve. Throughout its existence, the bureau has been persistently targeted by Republican politicians and the financial industry. The CFPB's status as an independent agency has been subject to many challenges in the court. In June 2020, the United States Supreme Court ruled that the president can remove the director without cause, but allowed the agency to remain in operation. In 2024, the Supreme Court affirmed the constitutionality of the CFPB, a funding mechanism prescribed by Congress. Donald Trump, at the outset of his second presidential term, appointed acting director Russell Vought, who immediately ordered the bureau to stop regulatory activity. Now, remember, who is this for is a question that you must ask yourself. The answer is rich people, and not even just like any kind of rich people, not even people who are, at the tippy top of American corporations, rich people that want to do fraud. Okay? That's it. It's not just like any kind of rich person. It's the type of rich person that wants to do fraud. Cryptocurrency rich people. Crypto people want this more than anybody else. Okay? Predatory lenders want this more than anybody else. It's like someone said Adam Conover has an episode on a show on the G Word. Exactly. It's like Donald Trump and his cronies watched the G Word and was like, we need to destroy all of these good federal government, all of these good government agencies and initiatives. Okay. The CFPB opened its website early February 2011 to accept suggestions from consumers via YouTube, Twitter, its own website interface. They have extracted with a $1 billion budget that they've only used 25% of. They've extracted $21 billion back and distributed back to the consumers. Now, there's still $700 million in the tank for the CFPB, even though it's no longer in operation as of, the Trump administration, right? Elon Musk has suggested that they take the $700 million in the tank for the CFPB and give it back to the American consumers. That's a whopping $2 that you get to take back. Meanwhile, they spent the $1 billion budget. The $1 billion budget was able to bring back $21 billion to the American consumer. So you tell me, what's better? $2 back or the $21 billion that it was able to claw back? Ridiculous. On February 1st, 2025, Chopra was fired by President Trump, making Deputy Director Zixta Martinez the acting director of the agency. 2 days later, Treasury Secretary and former hedge fund manager Scott Bessent was named the agency's director and immediately ordered the agency to halt all work. Who's this for, you might ask? This is some boring shit for the most part. The average American doesn't think about this stuff because good government, when it's working, is boring. It's working in ways that you never really comprehend, never really think about. Like the FDA. When you go to the market, to the grocery store, okay, and purchase a steak or purchase poultry, chicken, right? And you don't have to fear that you will consume a shitload of bacteria that will possibly kill you. That is because of the FDA, okay? It's working in a way where society can function. Do you understand? So many things that the federal government does, we take for granted. The NOAA is another one. The National Weather Service, a great example. It is profoundly important for commerce. It's profoundly important for, understanding what the is going on in terms of weather. USDA, exactly. FDA, USDA. These are all different ways in which the federal government works in invisible ways, okay? In ways that improve your life. Without them, we would be in a dire situation. Society would not function. It is crazy that these parasitic monsters want to pick apart the last remaining aspects of the federal government and are trying to basically destroy all of the remaining good parts of the federal government. It's crazy. There's a weird wrinkle about the shutdown of the CFPB. Banks are slowly realizing that they need an enforcer to tell them what the rules are and update those rules if necessary. The libertarian argument we can have a world without rules was always stupid, but in practice, until now, conservatives meant with a wink and a nod that you'd have regulators that were industry friendly, not that you'd have no regulators. And these regulators, at the very least, sorted out disagreements among the banks and financial firms. But now Trump has done what generations of libertarians asked for, but really didn't want, which was to have a world without a regulator. That means a bunch of consumer protection and banking laws still exist, but have no enforcement regime. So do the banks follow those laws or not? What about laws that structure entire industry-wide practices? And no private rights of action aren't really viable. Those pesky arbitration agreements conservatives also love made sure of that. Is Schrodinger's law, or perhaps a conservative movement that finally caught the car? Is unfairness, deception, or abusive practices in financial products now legal? Sort of, but maybe not. In other words, conservatives are going to have to rebuild some sort of administrative capacity under a different name that's going to be doing a lot of the same things. David Dan wrote an article on the CFPB. He said, it turns out that bankers and financiers hate not having an agency enforcing consumer protection laws. It tips the balance towards big banks and could break mortgage and other markets that rely on continuous supervision. Community banks and credit unions are still being regulated and big banks aren't. Rules that make mortgage markets run are in limbo. The industry doesn't want to break the means by which it makes money. This will cause a ton of jobs to be lost at financial institutions too if there's no regulatory enforcement. Tons of back office operations departments are at risk of being shut down if there's no reason for them to exist. I mean, that part for sure, but that's, again, an incredible opportunity for more profit. That means the banks are going to be run more efficiently, with less people. It's so funny that every single piece of regulation, every single rule was written with the ink of blood, okay? And it's ironic that these guys that man the ship and pick apart these regulatory agencies will inevitably cause genuine collapse. And within that genuine collapse, someone will still go back and rewrite the exact same rules because they exist for a good reason. This is not to say that there aren't like ridiculous rules or whatever, ridiculous rules or regulations. Of course there are. Having said that, however, this kind of approach where you just undermine these regulatory agencies that are doing good, that are tasked with like actually good shit, making sure that there's some regulatory mechanism against the banks, like taking that apart might lead to short-term profits for these banks, but there is a reason why it was designed to begin with. There's a reason for why we have these rules. It's so stupid. Just like the FDIC. Why does the FDIC exist? Why are banks paying this fee to this agency that has tremendous power over banks in moments of crisis? Because without it, if banks are not regulated, when bank runs occur, people will just destroy the economy. It has happened before. If you have no more confidence in your bank, if the money that you gave to your bank is no longer real money, real currency, you're going to panic. You're going to want to go back to that bank and you're going to want to take out all the money that remains and put it under a pillowcase. Okay? That's what happened. Understandably. Like, what's next? Are we going to go back to every single bank issuing their own currency like we are literally in the Wild West? F it. No more legal tender, okay? Every bank issues their own paper currency and nobody has any control over what how much that currency is actually worth. Let's just go back to the barter system, as a matter of fact. It's ridiculous. And it's ironic that I'm saying this, but like, that's kind of what cryptocurrency is. That's kind of what they want to do. It's craziness. Yeah. DeFi, baby. Decentralized finance. Oh. Anyway, now that I briefly talked about the inevitable collapse, let's get to Russia.
Trump has just announced that he has held a phone call with Vladimir Putin.
I gotta pee.
They covered issues on the Middle East, energy, artificial intelligence, but the concentration of that conversation was Ukraine. And Donald Trump said they discussed that they agreed they wanted to stop the war, stop the deaths in the Russia-Ukraine war. They have agreed to visit each other's nations. Trump has said he will call Zelensky in the very near future. And he said that he and Putin agreed to have respective teams start negotiations immediately. There you can see Donald Trump now posting on it. We both agreed we want to stop the millions of deaths taking place in the war with Russia and Ukraine. And President Putin even used my very strong campaign motto. He says, common sense. We both believe very strongly in it. And he said we agreed to work together very closely, including visiting each other's nations. We have also agreed to have our respective teams start negotiations immediately. So a highly significant moment. Donald Trump is wasting no time. He's been involved in the Middle East. He is now getting involved in Ukraine. Let's bring in our international affairs editor, Dominic Waghorn. And so, Dominic, it seems that the negotiations are going to get underway pretty soon.
Yeah, I mean, this is a bombshell notification from Donald Trump from the White House following a bombshell speech by his defense secretary in Brussels. But just to reiterate, because it is very significant, Mark, is what he's saying here, saying that after this 1.5-hour phone call, we agreed to work together. He is saying, the American president agreeing with the Russian leader, very closely, including visiting each other's nations. And the Kremlin has, in the last 5 minutes or so, confirmed that Putin and Trump have agreed to meet, not quite sure where, but there will be, it seems, another Trump-Putin summit. We've also agreed, the White House, or Donald Trump is saying there, to have our respective teams start negotiations immediately. And this is the significant bit also. We will begin by calling President Zelensky of Ukraine to inform him of the conversation. So that's a break. You know, we have seen all day efforts by not just John Healey, the British Defence Secretary, but other members of NATO to kind of stick fingers in the dike, the crumbling dike of NATO solidarity and unity after what Pete Hegseth said, the Defence Secretary there, trying to give the impression that there is still unity, whereas that impression, as I say, is crumbling because it's a break with what has been 3 years of firm and determination by NATO members to be united and behind the principle of not talking about Ukraine. Nothing is discussed about Ukraine without Ukraine. So we now have a break with that. We have the American president meeting on the phone, talking for an hour and a half with his Russian counterpart, not including Ukraine, discussing Ukraine.
Putin will never allow Ukraine to join NATO, as he shouldn't. I mean, guys, America was never serious about Ukraine joining NATO. Other NATO nations were never serious about allowing Ukraine to join NATO. This is something that I've repeatedly talked about over and over again. Finally, for all the haters in the chat, admit Hasan was right. They're never going to admit that. Okay? Like, this was an inevitability because the war was what determines the outcome of Russia's unjustifiable invasion of Ukraine was always going to be what happens on the ground in the battlefield. Okay. For America, this was an advantageous position. They did not want Ukraine to fall into the sphere of Russian influence, as Russia obviously made many, I wouldn't say demands, I guess, but like Russia definitely was invested in controlling Ukrainian politics. And Ukraine was consistently trapped between Russian sphere of influence and Western sphere of influence. Okay. And in terms of the Western sphere of influence, you thought Russia wouldn't invade Ukraine? Yeah, because I thought it would be a devastating predicament for all parties involved, which I was right about. I like that you're still pointing to this after history has shown time and time again that the numerous other instances where I said this is the opportunity to pull out and engage in ceasefire negotiations when leverage is in the hands. Like, this is the most leverage Zelensky will ever have. It's a great opportunity. It turns out I was right. It's not about whether I'm right or not.